Have you bought a new pair of Jordans lately? Done your weekly shopping at Costco? Or ordered something from Amazon? Then you may be closer to one of the biggest money reversals happening in America right now than you think. Amazon has already received about $600 million in tariff refunds. Nike says it paid roughly $1 billion in tariffs now at the center of this refund dispute. Costco customers have already gone to court over what should happen if tariff money comes back after customers allege that some of those tariff costs had already been reflected in the prices they paid. And these are only a few examples. FedEx has gone as far as building a dedicated tariff refund portal, where eligible customers can check whether FedEx has received a refund tied to their shipment and, where applicable, have that money passed back to them. This is much bigger than any one company. By the end of July, the U.S. government had already refunded about $100 billion. The original tariff pool was roughly $166 billion, which still leaves more than $60 billion unresolved. Not collecting, returning. We've explained how tariffs work before. This isn't another tariff lesson. This story starts after the tariff has already been paid, because now the money is coming back. The Supreme Court ruled that the emergency powers law used to impose these tariffs did not give the president that authority. The legal process that followed set the refunds in motion, and the government began paying qualifying importers back. But some of those tariff costs had already moved through American businesses and, in some cases, into the prices shoppers paid. So if about $100 billion has already come back, who actually got it? The company that wrote the check, the business that raised the price, or the customer who may have paid more without ever knowing why? And if different companies handled those costs differently, how do you even decide who deserves what when the money comes back? That is the problem now playing out across companies like Amazon, Nike, Costco, FedEx, and many others, and it isn't entirely new. Nearly 90 years ago, America faced a related problem. A tax was struck down after businesses had already passed some of its cost to their customers. Congress responded with something extraordinary. One part of its answer was an 80% tax. But before we get there, you need to see how $100 billion can move backward through an economy and still fail to automatically find its way back to the person standing at the end of the checkout line. To see where the money gets lost on the way back, start at the border. A company imports something and pays the tariff there, not the factory overseas, not you. From there, that added cost can go a few ways. The company can absorb it, press its suppliers to share it, or pass part of it forward into wholesale prices and sometimes onto the shelf. Which path it takes depends on the company, and that single fact is what makes the refund so hard to unwind. Because when the tariff is struck down, the government can only cleanly reverse one link in that chain. It knows exactly who paid at the border, so it can send that importer its money back to the dollar. What it has no record of is everything that came after. Which slice of the tariff became a higher price, which shopper quietly absorbed it, in which store months ago. So the refund travels back exactly one step from the government to the importer, and there the trail ends. Economists separate who legally pays a tax from who economically carries it. Reversing the first is simple. Reversing the second may be impossible. And in this case, the second is where almost everyone lived. Economists at the New York Federal Reserve measured where these tariffs actually landed and found that across 2025, close to 90% of the weight fell on U.S. firms and consumers. Combined, that last word matters. It doesn't mean 90% came out of shoppers' wallets. It means American businesses and households together absorbed the cost, not the foreign exporters the tariffs were meant to hit. How it split between a company and its customers changed from business to business. Take the Costco customers already in court. Their argument is specific. While the tariffs were in force, Costco's prices carried some of that cost. So if Costco now takes the refund and keeps it, it collects the same money twice, once from members and once from the government. The lawsuits call that double recovery. Costco's answer is that any refunds would reach members anyway, through lower prices rather than direct checks. nothing has been decided. It's an allegation a court still has to weigh. Nike shows why $1 billion in tariffs is more than an accounting line. The lawsuit against it alleges Nike raised prices by $5 to $10 on some sneakers and $2 to $10 on some apparel while the tariffs were in effect, and now stands to collect the refund on top of that with no binding promise to return a cent to the shoppers who paid more. Same double recovery claim, but attached to something you can picture on a shelf. And like Costco, it's an allegation. No court has found Nike liable, and the class isn't even certified. Which brings us back to that $600 million Amazon refund, because for a company Amazon's size, that number is small, and why it's small is the whole point. Amazon bought up inventory before the tariffs hit. Where it did face the cost, it says it mostly absorbed it rather than charging customers, and Amazon's marketplace makes the trail much harder to follow. Independent sellers account for more than 60% of sales in Amazon's store, and Amazon says it isn't the importer of record for the large majority of items sold there. So when Amazon said it would pay customers back, it could only promise to do so in a limited set of circumstances. The specific cases where it can actually trace that a particular import charge reached a particular buyer. Everywhere else, it can't draw the line. Sit with that. Amazon knows more about its customers than almost any company on earth, and even Amazon says it can connect these costs to individual shoppers only in a limited set of cases. Compare that with FedEx. FedEx can do something most retailers cannot. Match many refunds to specific shipment records because it has customs entry data connecting the charge to the customer who paid it. That's the exception. For most of the economy, a jacket that moved through a factory, a distributor, a marketplace, and a checkout, that line is a tangle. Whether you get your money back depends almost entirely on how traceable your purchase happened to be. None of this means the companies collecting refunds are pocketing free money. One that absorbed the tariff isn't getting a windfall. It's being repaid for a cost it swallowed. One still tied to a supplier contract may owe the money onward. One steering refunds into lower prices is handing it back by a slower road. So $100 billion in refunds is not $100 billion in profit. But strip all of that away, and one hard question is left standing. What about cases where prices did rise, customers did pay more, and the company later collects the refund with no obligation to pass any of it back? That's what the lawsuits are really about. And it's a problem this country has faced before. In the 1930s, the government taxed the companies that processed the nation's crops. Some of them built that tax into their prices and passed it to consumers. Then the Supreme Court struck that tax down, and those same companies lined up for refunds on money they had already collected from their customers. Congress saw the trap. It wrote rules that blocked a refund unless a company could prove it had actually borne the cost or had paid its buyers back. And it added a tax on what it called unjust enrichment, 80% on the money a business had earned by shifting a taxes burden onto someone else. 80 cents on the dollar, built to make that windfall not worth chasing. It wasn't today's tariff system, and it doesn't govern today's case. But the tension underneath was the same. Hand a tax back to whoever legally paid it, and you can end up rewarding the wrong people, because the real cost already moved on. So, why not do that again? Make companies prove who carried the cost and claw back the rest. Because the economy those rules were written for barely exists anymore. Back then, the path was short: a mill, a product, a buyer. Today, it runs through global supply chains, online marketplaces, millions of third-party sellers, and hundreds of millions of anonymous purchases that leave almost no trail from one shopper to one customs payment. We just watched Amazon. Amazon say it could trace only a fraction. The idea still makes sense. The machinery to carry it out may be gone. So the money came back. Who gets it? When we started, that question meant something simple. Where are the billions going? By now, it means something harder. Legally, the answer is clean: the importer that paid. Economically, it comes apart in your hands. Some companies absorbed the cost. Some shoppers carried part of it. Plaintiffs argue that certain companies are recovering money they had already collected once through higher prices. Some companies say the refunds will instead surface through lower prices. and the courts are still deciding where the line falls. The government can rewind the payment it took in far more easily than everything that payment set in motion. The prices that rose, the purchases that followed, the cost that changed hands a dozen times on the way to a receipt. Nearly 90 years ago, America answered a version of this with an 80% tax. Today, the real question isn't who pocketed the money. It's whether a modern economy can ever trace a cost back to the person who truly paid it, once that cost has scattered across thousands of ordinary purchases and simply disappeared.